You already know what they do to you. You have known for longer than you are willing to say out loud. Jung studied people like you. He called this one of the most reliable patterns in human psychology. Not weakness, not stupidity, but a specific mechanism, one that is almost always invisible to the person it is running inside. You have explained their behavior to people who were worried about you. You have minimized what happened so that others would not think badly of them. You have stayed, or you have gone back, or you have never fully left in the way that matters. You are not protecting them. You are protecting the version of yourself that needs them to be good. And Jung's question, the one this video will not let you avoid, is what that version of yourself is so afraid of finding out. Carl Jung spent decades observing a phenomenon he found more disturbing than cruelty. Cruelty, he said, was at least honest about what it was. What disturbed him was the consistency with which people defended, minimized, and remained loyal to the very figures who were harming them, and the consistency with which they were unable to see that they were doing it. He called the mechanism the shadow, not the darkness in the person harming you, the darkness in yourself, the parts of your own psychology that you have refused to integrate, refused to look at directly, because looking at them would cost you something you are not yet prepared to pay. The shadow, in Jung's framework, is not simply the bad things you have done or thought. It is everything about yourself that you have been unable to accept, including your own capacity to have chosen badly, to have needed someone who was not safe to need, to have built your sense of self around a relationship that was damaging it. Here is the mechanism directly. When a person has constructed their identity, their sense of being lovable, competent, real, around another person's approval, they cannot afford for that person to be unsafe. Because if the person they organized their life around was always unsafe, then every decision they made in relation to that person was a mistake. And that conclusion is often more threatening than the harm itself. So the shadow steps in. It runs the protection, not of the other person, but of the story. The narrative that says, they are complicated, they are struggling, they did not mean it, things will be different. This is what love looks like. Jung observed this pattern in the consulting room for 40 years. He never once found a person running it who knew they were running it. That is the point. The mechanism only works while it remains invisible. In the clinical literature on trauma bonding, researchers have documented what they call the paradox of protective loyalty. Survivors of sustained psychological harm from people they trusted, whether in families, partnerships, or institutions, consistently display a predictable pattern in the aftermath. They minimize the severity of what occurred. They contextualize the harmful person's behavior in ways that reduce culpability. They resist external attempts to name what happened accurately. What the research reveals is that this is not confusion. It is not a failure of intelligence or perception. In almost every documented case, the survivor could describe what happened with precision when asked directly. They simply organized their description in a way that consistently softened the conclusion. The protective distortion was not about the past, it was about the present, specifically about who the person would have to become if they accepted the full weight of what they already knew. Family systems researchers have identified what they call the identified patient, the role that forms in dysfunctional family structures where one member carries the psychological weight of the system's problems, while the structure that produces those problems remains protected. What is less discussed is the complementary role, the protector, the family member who maintains the fiction that the structure is functional, who explains, softens, manages perceptions, who becomes the buffer between the damaging dynamic and anyone who might name it accurately. Protectors are rarely aware of the role they are performing. They experience themselves as loyal, as understanding, as the only person who truly grasps the complexity of the situation. Jung writes in the Red Book, "The most dangerous thing of all is to have no darkness." He means the person who has expelled their shadow entirely, who has convinced themselves they are only light, only good, only the helper, has no access to the information the shadow carries, including the information that what they are protecting is themselves. You have had a conversation about them with someone who was worried, someone who said something that landed, who named something that you had been carefully not naming. And you defended them, not aggressively, carefully, with nuance. You explained the context, you described their difficulties, you made sure the person you were speaking to understood that the situation was more complicated than it appeared. And afterwards, alone, you sat with what you had done. You had just spent 20 minutes protecting the person who was hurting you from someone who was trying to protect you. And you know why? You know exactly why. You have always known why. The question is whether you are willing to say it. The mirror does not ask whether you love them. It asks what you would have to become if you stopped protecting them. You know what they do, not in the vague, complicated way you describe it to other people. In the precise, specific way you know it at 3 a.m. when you are not managing anyone's perception of them, including your own. You know the pattern. You know what comes before it and what comes after. You know what it costs you, and you know that the cost has been accumulating, and you have protected them from that knowledge being spoken aloud, not always, not perfectly, but enough that the structure stays intact, enough that the version of yourself that is built inside that structure does not have to face what it would mean if the structure were not there. Jung's shadow framework asks one question of you here, not, why do you stay? People ask you that and you have answers, good answers, complicated, nuanced, partially true answers. The question is, what part of you requires them to be redeemable? Because that part is not protecting them. It is protecting something in you that was formed before them, something that decided at some point that your worth was contingent on the approval of someone who was not safe to need. And that has been recruiting every relationship since into the same configuration. The person you are protecting is the current face of something older, and the version of you that needs them to be good, that works tirelessly to make the evidence fit a conclusion that keeps the structure standing. That version of you is the shadow, not their darkness, yours. You are not protecting them. You are protecting the version of yourself that needs them to be good. Jung was not interested in telling you to leave. He was not a self-help practitioner, and he would have been offended to be described as one. What he was interested in was integration, which is the precise opposite of the protection mechanism this video has been describing. Integration, in Jung's framework, means bringing the shadow into consciousness, not eliminating it, not resolving it into something more comfortable, looking at it directly, naming it accurately, and allowing that recognition to change the shape of your choices going forward. What this means practically is not a decision about the other person. It is a decision about the version of you that has been running the protection. That version was formed under real conditions. It made sense once. It was a genuine attempt to stay safe in an environment where the cost of seeing clearly was too high. Jung had enormous compassion for that version of a person. He spent his career with them. What he did not have compassion for was the refusal to see it once the seeing became possible. Because the moment you can name the mechanism, the moment you can say, I am not protecting them, I am protecting the part of me that cannot afford for them to be unsafe, is the moment the mechanism loses its invisibility. And a mechanism that can be seen can be questioned, not fixed, not resolved, questioned. That is the only payoff Jung offers. It is the only honest one. What you do with the question is yours. There is a version of this that goes in the other direction. Not protecting someone who is harming you, but being the one doing the harming, and being the last person to know it. The next video is about what it looks like when the shadow is not protecting someone else's damage, when it is concealing your own.